Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be
Whoa, what are you doing?
I'm making a video.
Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Before we get started, I know I've given you guys a lot of sneak peeks about all the giveaways that I'll be doing in the future, but finally, I'm ready to share them in the next video. So don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notifications so you don't miss that. Today's video, we're building a PC for my wife, Crystal. She's going to be using it for gaming, everyday use, and for her art business. I'll link her social media details below and show you some of her work later. Her art is really good and I recommend checking it out. Since the PC is for Crystal, I thought it'd be a good idea if she builds it. So in today's video, I'll be simply a cameraman that'll be giving her tips on how to build a computer. We're going to be using the Ryzen 7 5800X, which is an 8-core 16-thread processor, partnered with a 3060 Ti. She's upgrading from an i5 8th generation quad-core processor, so the performance upgrades will be really good. And we're going to be building in the Lian Li O11 Mini case. So let's dive right into it. So like I said, I'm just the cameraman today. For this build, I had originally ordered an MSI Gaming Edge X570 motherboard, but Crystal had wanted a white theme, and NZXT had just come out with the N7B550 motherboard, so I had to jump on that. The timing of the release was perfect and I'm happy we ended up using this board. The white look is beautiful, and it almost has all the features you would expect from a mid to high range motherboard. The only thing I didn't like was the fact that the M2 SSDs don't have a thermal pad to keep them cool, but other than that, I loved working with this board. I'll link it in the description if you want to check it out. It comes in white and a matte black color as well. For the processor, you already know we had to go AMD. My PC is AMD, so it's only right that my wife's should be too. I picked out the Ryzen 7 5800X for her because it's powerful enough to handle video editing, gaming, and anything else Crystal might use it for. I know there are faster processors out there, but I think this was a good sweet spot for this build. You don't always need the best of everything out there, especially when you're not going to use it to its full potential. The Ryzen 7 5800X is an 8-core 16-thread processor, clocking in at 3.8 GHz. Like I mentioned before, she's upgrading from an i5 8th generation quad-core processor, so this will be significantly faster for her. To install the CPU is fairly easy. I was able to get the audio of giving Crystal some tips on how to install. Let's take a quick listen. When you place it, just gently place it and wiggle it around until it kind of drops in by itself. Don't wiggle it too hard though. Yep. It should drop. Did it drop? There you go. So there's not much more to it. The one thing I recommend you do before you touch the processor is to locate the golden arrow on the processor and find the matching arrow on your motherboard. This makes installing it really easy since you know which way it goes in. For the memory, I had to get some crystals. I picked out the G-Skill Trident Z-Royal 16GB kit. Since the motherboard has 4 slots, I just ended up getting 2 of these kits to make it a total of 32GB of memory. Also, the glass is so shiny that it can show you your future. No joke. Take a look. I know I just said that we shouldn't get stuff that we aren't going to use to its full potential, but in this case, the aesthetics are the reason I made the decision. Filling up all the RAM slots just looks great. Look at how gorgeous these things are. The crystals at the top are RGB and can be controlled via software. The glass finish on the sides is also a nice touch, even though they are a fingerprint magnet. After installing, we had to clean the sides using the microfiber cloth that came with the memory. The processor and memory is in, and it's already looking really good. The reflections in the glass just makes this look so good. I'm almost jealous that Crystal is building this and not me. Personally, I like to install as much of the parts as I can before mounting the motherboard into the case. It's just easier to do that since the motherboard is out in the open and not inside some case. Especially in the O11 Mini case, which is a really tiny case. On this board, you just have to lift these magnetic blocks that cover the M2 slots. Like I mentioned, I was disappointed that there is no thermal pad for the M2s. We're also using the second M2 slot instead of the first one because the first one will hold the drive that we're going to move from our old PC. I don't know why, but I didn't get that on camera, so just pretend you already saw us do that. Thank you. To install the M2 SSD, just line up the cutout of the grooves on the drive to that on the motherboard. Insert it at an angle and give it a firm push using a finger or two until you hear it click into place. Firm. Yep, and that's it. Yep. Then lower it and secure it into place using a screw. The screw normally comes with your motherboard, and sometimes even with your case. For the CPU cooler, I'm using an Enermax ETS T50. It's an off-brand cooler I got from Amazon, and I was really impressed with this. Since Crystal is not going to be overclocking or pushing the CPU to its limit, I thought it'd be a good thing to try it out. Surprisingly, the temps look really good at all the times that I've tested it after completing this build. If you're overclocking or plan on pushing your PC to its limits regularly, I would recommend spending a little bit more on your cooler. This cooler came with its own brackets, and we had to remove the existing AM4 brackets on the motherboard before installing. Doing that is really easy. We just have to unscrew the 4 screws holding the bracket into place and remove the backplate from the back. To install the new bracket, we just lined up the bracket and the motherboard and used the screws that came with it to secure it. On the motherboard itself, we had to insert some tabs, which is where the front plate would sit, and then we had to secure the plate itself using some nuts. The cooler sits on these plates while the thermal pad makes contact with the CPU, so it's really important to make sure all of these screws and nuts are properly tightened and everything is properly secured before installing the cooler itself. The fan in the back part on the cooler can be removed if you're working with space constraints, which we were due to the memory. Now that we have everything ready, we just need to apply thermal paste before installing the cooler.
It was supposed to be hard. Okay. This
was not planned. Crystal is just a goofy person, which makes sense since she's an artist, one of the many reasons I love her. She did a really good job spreading it out and making sure it was evenly applied across the processor. Again, not surprising since she works with paint and is probably used to applying it evenly across her work. With the thermal paste applied, we just need to line up the screws on the cooler and on the board to get it installed. Lining it up is important so it makes contact properly, so don't rush this. Once it's lined up, just take turns tightening each screw a little bit until it's fully secured. Now that it's secured, we just add the fan and the backplate back on, and it's done. We have installed as much as we can without the case, so let's take a look at the case we are working with. This is the Lian Li O11 Mini, and it looks great. The one thing to note is that without the expansion plate that comes in the accessory box, this case can only support micro ATX and mini ITX motherboards. To get the case ready, we just need to get all the side panels removed. Lian Li did a really good job in the way they designed this case. You remove the top panel first by unscrewing the 2 screws on the back, and then the side panel just comes right off without having to unscrew any additional screws. The side panel that's not the glass panel still has 2 screws, so you can always open up the back without having to open up the top panel. Now that the case is open, we need to install the expansion plate before we can install our motherboard. Installation of this is really easy. You insert the tab in the cutouts of the case and secure it into place using 3 screws. I know looking at it you can't tell, and trust me, I was nervous about this as well. It's really well designed and I tested it out and it was super secure. Almost no difference between this and having a case that works with the ATX motherboards by default. To install the motherboard, just line up the I/O shield with the cutout on the case and make sure the motherboard standoffs are installed and lined up. The next part is really easy, but does take some time. We need to secure the motherboard to the case by screwing it in. I recommend screwing opposite ends to make this a lot easier, but I didn't tell Crystal this, and she still managed to make this look easy. Not bad for someone who hasn't built a PC in over a decade. If you haven't figured it out already, the theme of this build is white silver. So I picked up some sleeved PSU extensions in white. After braiding the cables and breaking our thumbs, Crystal installed a 24-pin motherboard extension cable and the CPU cable as well. We didn't do the GPU ones just yet since the GPU isn't ready to be installed. And since we are working with power cables, it's the perfect time to install the power supply. This case is so small that it only takes the SFX form factor power supplies. I had actually ordered an ATX power supply, but that wouldn't work here. But that's okay because I can always use it in the PCs that I'm going to give away on the channel. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss those videos. I picked out a 700 watt fully modular power supply. I recommend installing all the cables you need before mounting the power supply since the case might make it really hard to do that later. Installing the power supply itself is really easy. Just insert it, line it up with the 4 screws on the back, and then secure it into place. On this case, the power supply sits on a metal bracket as well, making it extra secure. Nicely done, Lian Li. With the power supply installed, we can connect the power cables to the extension cables that we installed earlier. The extension cables are always a bit stiffer, so this can take some force, but make sure these are properly connected so you don't have any issues later. With everything else done, it's finally time for the GPU to be installed. To install the GPU, we need to remove the back plates on the case. Normally, you'd line up your GPU to identify which plates need to be removed. But once you do this enough, you have a pretty decent idea on which ones need to come off. And also this way, I get to keep building suspense for which GPU we're using. But don't worry, the wait is over. We are using the Nvidia 3060Ti. I actually picked this up a few months ago, but we were getting married and moving 1,500 miles across the country, so this build took a backseat for a while. But it's definitely worth the wait. The black and silver two-tone is absolutely gorgeous and gives this build a nice centerpiece. To install the GPU, we just lower the bracket on the PCIe slot, line up the grooves and give it a nice firm push until you hear it click into place. Then use the screws that you removed earlier to secure it into place. Don't forget to make sure this is properly secured or it will sag later, making it look weird. So just take the extra few seconds to do it right. The new 30 series Nvidia GPUs have their own custom power connectors that come with the GPUs. So we used that and connected the white extension cables to it. Since we have almost all the cables taken care of, let's take care of the case cables that are left over. We had to install the HD audio, USB-C, USB 3, and the front panel cables from the case. Speaking of cables, there are a bunch of cables with fans. And we installed 9 fans in this PC. I helped Crystal figure out the orientation of the fans, and then she got to installing them. Since it was going to be a lot of cables, here's my only tip on cable management. Have a plan. As long as you have a plan around how you're going to be managing the cables, it's going to look significantly better compared to if you built it without having a plan. We rotated the fans so we would have the least amount of cables showing in the front, and so it made it really easy to route the cable into the back. Having a plan can help you avoid having to reinstall parts to get the cables right. After we talked through what our plan was, Crystal got to installing the fans. These are easy enough to install, but obviously with 4 screws each and having a total of 9 fans, this can take a few minutes. So just enjoy the process and watch Crystal speed install all these fans. While Crystal is installing the fans, let me plug myself a little bit. In the description, you can find all my social media links. I post often on my Instagram and respond to DMs as much as I can. So if you want to follow my builds or just want to talk, check it out. My Patreon is also in the link description below if you'd like to support my channel. As you know, GPUs are not cheap. PC is almost done. We just need to install some of the hard drives we pulled from Crystal's old PC. She had an M2 SSD, a 2.5-inch SSD, and a 3.5-inch mechanical hard drive. For some reason, I didn't record the M2 installation as I mentioned earlier. But installing the 2.5 and the 3.5-inch drives is really a piece of cake. The trays pull out of the case, and you just need to line up the holes on the back of the drives to the cutouts on the tray and secure it into place. I recommend installing the SATA cables beforehand since it's almost impossible to do that once they're back in the case. Again, we route the cables before installing the parts to make it easier for us to manage cables. After everything was installed, here is the back. But don't worry, Crystal had a magic fairy help her and turn this grossness into this. It was definitely a magic fairy and not me, guys, I promise. And that's all there is to building the PC. We just need to close up the panels in the same way we removed them, but this time we get to enjoy all the plastic being peeled. Again, super jealous that Crystal got to remove the plastic, but it's her PC and she built it, so it's only fair. Normally I'd recommend booting up your PC to make sure that it works before closing it up, but I was double checking everything along the way and was pretty confident that it would work on the first try, and apart from one of the memory sticks not being seated properly, I was right. I opened it up later to fix that, but that was really a quick fix. I hope you guys liked the video. If you did, please remember to hit that like button. It really helps the YouTube algorithm. I know Crystal and I had a lot of fun building this computer. Like I mentioned earlier, in my next video I'll be giving away all the details on how to win a PC on this channel. I have so much stuff lined up and I can't wait to share it with you. So make sure to hit subscribe and turn on the notifications so you don't miss out. Thanks for watching.